All right, welcome everybody to Dojo Talks. We are here today to discuss a couple ideas for scoring chess games, the wins and the losses differently. The traditional scoring method is 1 point for a win in a tournament or a match standing, and half a point for a draw and 0 points for a loss. Pretty simple, been that way for a really long time. Some years ago, people introduced the idea of soccer scoring, or at least that's what they call it. I don't know if soccer was the first place to do it, but where they basically give 3 points for a win and 1 point for a draw and 0 points for a loss. So it just gives you that extra incentive to win, where a win is counting as much as 3 draws instead of 2. So it would basically give you an incentive to take more risks to try and win. Jesse, you're probably our biggest authority on football here. Do you know what the origin of that scoring system is in football? Like, how long have they had it? And was it because they had too many ties, or?
First of all, I was, briefly following the Premier League. I guess that makes me the Dojo's leading authority on football, aka
it's either you or Pikachu. So I think it's you.
In any case, I'm going to say it's about 15, 20 years old. I'm just guessing around that. And I think it was first in the Premier League that they did it. And same as in chess, where they didn't want teams to just kind of sit there and push the ball around, give them an incentive to go for it.
Yeah. It makes it easier, I guess, if you've got any kind of standings in a multi-match situation. If you've got some kind of standings, a team that's behind can also try to catch up by winning games and put more pressure on you, right? A lot of times in the chess tournaments that we watch, somebody will be ahead by even just half a point, and they'll just start making draws and it'll be like, oh, nobody's going to catch them. But certainly if they're ahead by a full point, by 2 wins, it can be very hard for anyone to catch up. So the thought that people behind you can get 3 points for a win, I guess, puts a little pressure on the person in the lead. So that's one scoring proposal, which has been out there. We're going to discuss that today, but we're also going to discuss a much newer proposal, which is called the Venceslav Rutar scoring system. And this was introduced by a fellow named Joe Brown. No, actually, Venceslav Rutar. And we are hosting a match today and tomorrow that we're going to comment. So we're going to see the thing in action live, which may change our opinions, because there's nothing like actually testing stuff, right? And just seeing what comes out. Mm-hmm. You do it. But this is a new scoring system that we're going to discuss, and I'm going to try and just give you guys a brief sense of how it works, and then we'll let Jesse and Kostya start talking about it. So first of all, the system has 0 through 5 points. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Actually, no way to score 4 points. You get 5 points for winning a game and 0 points for losing. So that's the basics.
Oh, and I got some useful graphics here. Let me just pull up for the YouTube audience.
Yeah, pull up, Kostya, pull up.
Yeah. Okay. Now people can kind of see it, and then David, you can break it down for us. Sorry, you mentioned we've got this match coming up today with Sam Shanklin and Niels Grandelia, so they're kind of like testing out this new system today and tomorrow at the time of recording, folks. So it might be yesterday or a couple days ago when you listen to this. But yeah, that match will be available on our Twitch and stuff.
Right. So then there's 3 different scorings for draws. A draw can get you 3 points, 2 points, or 1 point. And that's based on whether the draw is equal, favored, or disfavored. And the calculation for whether a draw is favored or disfavored is fairly straightforward. It's just the material on the board when the game ends. So if you have more pieces on the board when the game ends, think like bishop and wrong rook pawn against a king, for example, right? The game eventually ends in a draw. You can't queen the pawn, but because you have more material on the board, you would get the favored draw and you would get 3 points. And your opponent would get the disfavored draw. They would get 1 point because they had less material when they held. Or the most basic chess endgame of all, I guess, would be king and pawn on the 7th rank against king, and it's a stalemate, right?
Yeah.
The smallest material you can be up, not quite enough to win, so close to being a win. And that would be scored also as a favored draw for the side with the pawn and a disfavored draw for the side without the pawn. And again, points would be split 3 and 1 right there.
So you get 5 points for a win,
Yeah.
3 points for a favored draw where you're leading, 1 point for a disfavored draw, and then 2 points for an equal draw. So this also has like some elements of the soccer system here, because you get more for a win.
It has like half of a soccer scoring system benefit, with the win being worth 5 points. And I think the crux of this system, or the really new idea, is how to score the draws, right? Because the win, honestly, he could have left the win at 4 points if he wanted to, and make a win have the same relationship to a draw as before, or he could have given it 6 points and made it like full on soccer scoring. He's got it as like a more moderated boost, right, than the full soccer scoring. But what's really interesting here is that you can get ahead over several rounds by scoring favored draws, right? Certainly in a match, if you score a favored draw against your opponent, you're really building a lead. And even in a tournament, it's going to be enough to nudge ahead.
Yeah, with this system, 2 favored draws would be better than scoring a win and a loss.
Yeah.
Which I don't know how I feel about that, but I guess we'll get into it. Because for me, that's a big...
we'll work through our feelings here in a moment.
It's a big thing, yeah.
Just to start off, we want to make sure everybody understands the system. So there's no alternative way for games to be drawn or won or whatever. The rules of chess are the same. The only thing that he points out that there isn't this thing that you sometimes have in online games where it says insufficient material and the game just ends. In theory, you have to play it out to a 3-fold repetition or a 50-move rule or something like that, or you can agree to a draw like in normal chess, but then whoever has more points on the board when the draw is agreed would get the favored draw. And of course, you could have king and bishop against king and bishop and have an equal draw of 2 points against 2.
So just to clarify, if the game ends with king and knight against king, that would be a favored draw for the side with the knight.
Favored draw for the side with the knight, yeah. You'd have more points. They'd come out ahead. And then before we really get into it, one last thing. Kostya also mentioned there has been some talk about scoring stalemates as a win. So that's like a possible variant of chess, which you could see that as changing the rules or changing the scoring. I don't know which way you would look at it. It could be either, but that's another way, which would create a lot more wins for stronger sides in endgames, right? Less draws, and it would be tougher to defend a lot of bad endgames. So it could, all these changing the scoring, even if you don't change the rules, has repercussions on how people are going to end up playing it. So, let's toss it over to Jesse. Jesse, first impressions about any of those 3 scoring ideas?
Yeah. Let me begin by the big elephant in the room. So the elephant is that draws have been portrayed as bad. And to my mind, this is largely a fault of chess commentary, where, you hear commentators say things like, oh, no, this is going to turn into a draw. How boring. And usually, really, draws are amazing. Draws can be totally amazing. There's nothing wrong with a draw. Draws can be a beautiful thing. And if I was going to have a critique on the draw, I would say it's been a problem where we have so-called GM draws. And these GM draws, sometimes it's because people are bros that they make the draws, but more often it's kind of a mutual fear. There's like a sense that the game will go forever and they're going to be exhausted and they just can't be up to the challenge. So somebody offers a draw. And that happened a lot more when I was a kid than it does now, partly because of David Pruess's crusade against draws. But I do want to mention that in this regard, and maybe I should just say you call this a variant if you like, but a rule that hasn't become standard, but is out there in a lot of top tournaments, is that you can't offer a draw until move 30. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that definitely changed the culture.
That might be called Sophia rules. It might have been introduced by Toplav's camp.
Right. I feel like that's, if I play a tournament and they got that rule, I'm fine with it. That's great. And it does add to the tension of the game, because it's like, yes, there could come a position in the early move in the 20s. And I'm like, oh, I don't know, maybe I could offer a draw here. Or also in St. Louis this summer, I thought even a better one, which was very new to me, was you were just simply not allowed to offer a draw.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, so the game can still end in a draw, but no puedo offer a draw. And that was also interesting because the draw was like the one time you kind of were allowed to talk to your opponent in any kind of way. So that rule also took away even the possibility of saying something to your opponent. So now, especially in a top tournament, then any kind of conversation you have with your opponent is like indirectly through the arbiter, right? Tell him to stop moving his feet so much or something like that, you know? Okay. So let me just, I'm a little bit of a rant here, but I just want to quickly go through these. I'm against them all, David.
Against them all.
I'm definitely against the stalemate thing. I think that's abysmal.
Yeah.
The stalemate is a beautiful piece of chess culture and history. There's all these beautiful puzzles that end in stalemate. It's a beautiful part of our culture.
Right.
And then this Rutar thing, I'm just horrendously against, though I like that the guy, what I do like about it is he's putting his own money on the line to test this idea. And so that's great. You know, I think that's really cool. If somebody has an idea and they're willing to put some money on the line to test it out, beautiful.
Yeah. I mean, he's a scientist and he's running an experiment, right? He's putting up something around $5,000 per match to have really strong grandmasters test it out and see what's the result.
So imagine this situation that we've all been in. You know, you're in this attacking game and you start realizing that maybe the attack's not going to work out. You've already sacrificed a bunch of your stuff and you find an amazing way to force a perpetual check.
Yeah.
Right. We've all done that. Yeah. And I'm going to have less pieces at that point, but did I get a unfavored draw? Give me a break. I was the one attacking. I should be the one with the points, buddy. Give me a break. You know, don't give me no disfavored draw for that. Get out of here.
Yeah, if you've been a gambiteer, it almost feels like you were the one like creating the chess content, like pushing the risk factor, you know. And if anyone should get a favored draw, it should be you. You were the creative force behind the work of art.
Right. Or you imagine there's sometimes of magical like fortresses where, you know, the pawns are locked in such a way that, you know, there's some positions even where the guy can be a queen up and you're still going to hold because the pawns hold it all back. That's genius. Another cool one, you know. So there's all kinds of ways in which, you know, it seems ridiculous to have this disfavored draw thing. I'm going to cede the floor, though, and we're going to come back to talk about the soccer rules thing because I feel like I've talked too much.
Yeah, no, I think, you could definitely kind of detail this system and change it up, like based on specific cases like perpetual check. And I definitely like the ambition, but for me, the issue with like changing the rules and stuff, it really comes down to the question, like, what's the problem you're trying to fix exactly? I think that's kind of the important thing to figure out. Like, is it draws in general? Is it boring draws? Is it, you know, whatever it may be, tournaments where there's too much incentive to make a draw or to play it safe? I think there's different maybe issues there. I have some sympathy for this one, some sympathy for the stalemate rule. I think it would be fun to just see what would happen if stalemate was a win. It has some logic to it. You know, you're putting your opponent in stalemate. They have no moves. You know, they have to resign if they have no moves. I think there's some, but of course the issue is that it just kind of just changes the game fundamentally. And I think this system, the Rutar system, would also change the game quite a bit because he had I was reading his thing, or we were discussing how the Carlsen Caruana match would have been different if it was scored under this system. And I remember, David, you were telling us that the match actually would have been equal by the end, with some players leading throughout the way. So sometimes Magnus would have the favored draw, sometimes Fabio would have the favored draw.
For anyone who doesn't know, the match Kostya is referring to was 12 consecutive draws. Right. So by standard scoring systems, the match was tied at every single moment in the entire match. And there were certainly people who talked about it being boring, right? So this would be an example of, or this is an example that Venceslav refers to when he tries to explain how he could increase the excitement with this scoring system, right? Because they exchanged favorable draws in a certain sense. So you would have seen the player who had the advantage nudge slightly ahead at certain points, and then the other player bring it back when they had draws where they were ahead. And overall, it was still a balanced match, but he thinks it's more exciting if you see these little leads coming and going.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I found the match incredibly interesting, despite every game being drawn. Compared to, let's say, the Anand Gelfand match, which also had a lot of draws, I found that one much less interesting. Just for me, due to the, I don't know, the games I felt like were shorter. They were often just kind of petering out of the opening with one side showing good prep. So I thought the Carlsen Caruana games had a ton of fight. But what kind of, I don't know, what was unfortunate for me was like, what we learned was that in that game 12, in that match, Magnus had like a big advantage out of the opening, decides to offer a draw to force a tiebreak, kind of controversial decision. He wins the tiebreak, and so on and so forth. But had he just finished that game out under this system and got a favor draw, because he was like so much better, so presumably he could have gotten a favor draw, then he would have won the match right there on the spot. And for me, it's like, oh, it's kind of a shame, because it's like you win the match by making a draw, but you didn't actually outscore your opponent. So it's like he wins with draws.
So to you, that would be more of a shame than him playing rapid chess and not even playing the game out.
I thought, yeah, the rapid chess tiebreak would be much more interesting than watching Magnus, instead of trying to win that game, trying to force that game into some pawn up endgame that ends in stalemate. Because that's my fear, is that players would now, instead of trying to win the game, would now try to win by a favored draw, thus kind of killing the game in a sense, because they're no longer trying to win.
Maybe that's why he bumped the win up from 4 points to 5, so that it wouldn't be such a dominant strategy to just try and squeak out dozens of favored draws throughout your career.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it also wouldn't change FIDE ratings, so you might still have some FIDE incentive to win games occasionally against lower rated players, but for tournament standings, you could go for favored draws. So
definitely this kind of system for me, it seems like it changes everything, which is a big drawback, because, you know, if you just change like the way chess is scored, it's like you're messing with history, and then all of a sudden things become very different. I have no issue with just running random events, you know, and just like trying different scoring systems out. But then, yeah, it's hard to see what the long-term goal of that is. Yeah.
I mean, I've heard several super GMs say that in chess, the size of advantage you need to beat another super GM is just so big that it's hard to score, period, right? And I think it was Grishuk who said something like, just because Magnus can score doesn't mean the goal is big enough at some point, 8 or 9 years ago, when Magnus was like winning games, and then people were like, oh, see, it is possible. You could win games. He's like, no. Just because one person can do it doesn't mean anyone else can. And so this favored draw is an example of trying to sort of widen the goalposts, right? Allow you to show a superiority that's maybe not enough to be up a rook at the end, but enough to really show your superiority, and then reward that a little bit in the score. And so we've talked about one of the motivations of the system is to increase the excitement, right, by having the scoring more like this. But I think a second motivation is a kind of like justice or fairness. And I think this also comes in with the question of how to score stalemates, right? Because in a stalemate, you could say, hey, I've got an extra bishop and pawn, didn't I show my superiority? Don't I deserve to score more, right? This system is trying to say the better players should score a bit more. It shouldn't just all be wiped out by the fact that it ends up in a draw. And so there's an attempt there also to provide a certain fairness, right? Where the player who has the advantage and gains the advantage and outplays the opponent throughout the game gets something, even if they don't outplay them by enough of a margin to win at the end.
So to me, this issue of like the goal not being wide enough, to me, I feel like, and maybe this is related, I don't know, but to me, I feel like this is better fixed by switching over, either by shortening the time control, where you get more decisive games. Even if you shorten the classical time control a little bit, you get more decisive games, or by switching over to 960, which I know a lot of top players are, I think, completely on board with. I think in 960, you don't see nearly the same number of let's say, draw rates in if you were to play in classical chess.
Right.
And I think a big part of why you see a lot of draws at the top is because players are extremely well prepared in the opening, especially with white. They know everything. They can achieve a position that's very safe for them. And then it's really hard for someone not named Magnus Carlsen to then outplay a solid 2600 GM that just doesn't want to lose. But if you switch over to 960, then I feel like all that stuff gets thrown out the window, and then the difference in chess level becomes much more apparent. So I haven't always been in favor of 960, but lately, like, the more I've been thinking about it, the more I'm just like totally on board to play 960 in classical chess. Yeah. And just have that become like the new chess, basically. I know it's a separate topic, but
we covered that topic once on a Dojo Talk a while ago, and just talking to you this past week, I was like, it seems like Kostya's changed his mind since we recorded that podcast.
Yeah, I was listening. I think the same Grischuk had a podcast, and he was mentioning how he much prefers like 960, and he would be so happy. And then I'm just thinking about all the time I would save, like not having to prep openings. You just show up to a tournament. No, I'm totally on board, and it's still fun. And you can minimize it. Like, it doesn't have to be chess 960. I've played other variants. You can start with the rooks in the corner to make it a little bit less chaotic. Like, you can reduce the number of positions, but it doesn't have to be chess 1.
Chess 18 and other.
Yeah. Even just switching the bishop and knight on the first position already like freshens up the game. Just
Jesse, let me put it to you this way: when you outplay some scrub, and you work them and you work them and you work them and you work them, and then you get a pawn up rook endgame, and after 5 hours it's a draw.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like you should have gotten more points than the scrub?
No, I was only up a pawn. But I mean, the other thing that's hilarious about this system is it's like rewarding materialism. Like, what if I'm up a tempo? Do I get to win if I'm up a tempo? What about that? Where's my tempo, baby?
You don't want the scoring to be based on tempi.
What if I had a better pawn structure? What about these other qualities in chess? Why is this materialism thing going to be, No, I'm not into it.
Well, okay, material is very easy to count. I mean,
it's easy to count. Yeah. So interesting that I'm going to become the minority opinion on this chess 960 thing. The other thing I want to say about what I think computers have shown, is that, like, when I was a kid, there was this draw thing too. So this is pre-computers. And people were like, oh, it's so hard. And if somebody's going to be white and they just want to draw, they can make a draw. That was kind of like the GM ethos back in the day. But now what we're seeing is the computer as black is going to beat all of us. You give a pawn or two as black and still win. So it's whether I get it, we can't all play like the computer, but what the computer is showing is that the range of chess skill is much higher than we actually thought it was. And that range is actually getting wider and wider as the computer improves. So it's showing that, of course, no, you can win as black. You can do it. It might be difficult, but it's definitely possible.
Right. Yeah, if we imagined what God's rating would be or something like that many years ago.
Yeah.
When Kasparov and Karpov were playing, we might have thought, there's like 2 levels above them. God would be rated 3,200.
Right.
Or something like that, right? And now we're learning that God would be rated like 3,850 or something just insane. There's a computer that can consistently beat a computer that can consistently beat a computer and like 4 levels down to Magnus.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so it doesn't feel like chess is quite dead yet. And it's not like we see draws just all the time everywhere. Like, if you guys remember, India just like dominated the Olympiad. It's not like there was a bunch of teams that were super close and everyone was drawing everyone else, and there was just like one game that ended in a win, and India just like showed everyone there's a huge gap that it can be still there at the top. So I don't feel like there's a huge urgency to change chess just yet.
But those were also outlier performances, right? Like Gukesh's performance is sort of like similar to Fabiano at the Sinkfield Cup. Like, it only happens once every 10 years or so that somebody has that kind of result. I would be surprised if Gukesh shows that same kind of difference in his future tournaments.
Yeah, but their whole team did incredible. So it was like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, lightning kind of struck multiple times there. But it just shows us that there's still a huge disparity in level to be sought after. And I mean, they're just getting better. You know, Gukesh is just going to get stronger. He lost a game, right, in the European Club Cup. Who knows how strong he's going to be now after losing this this game. He just always comes back.
One thing about both, a critique I have both on the soccer scoring and this Rutar system, is that the motivation, there's two sets of motivations that are in conflict. And I think this is why the soccer scoring thing, one of the reasons the soccer scoring thing failed. By the way, the soccer scoring thing came about, I'm going to say 5-10 years ago. And it seemed for a hot second that it was going to be the new norm. And then it really just disappeared. No one's using it, or very few people are using it. Right. Okay, I think a main reason why it didn't take off is there's a competing set of motivations. So obviously, then if you score something 3 for a win, or in this case with the Rutar system, 5 for a win, that really affects the tournament standing. But the tournament standing isn't the only thing that these players are competing for. They're also playing for rating, right? And whether you're a chump who's 1,700 or 1,200 or a 2,800, that rating does mean something to you, sometimes more and sometimes less. There's a lot of tournament situations where you're not playing for the first prize and you're just playing a game trying to play well, and the rating is going to be a thing. So the rating is then going to be treated as the way a draw would normally be taken. Right. Whereas in the tournament, then it's 1 or 3 for the soccer, or 5 or 1 for Rutar. So that's just a completely different set of motivations for the player that, I don't know, you have to do some crazy calculus then as a player to figure out which of those life decisions you're going to want to follow there.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And in very few cases do the players care more about the tournament than about just their normal chess calculus.
Right.
And their rating points and so forth. I mean, basically the world championship cycle is the only thing that really comes to mind where you really care about the tournament standings more than about other things. At most tournaments, the top players are playing for appearance fees, so the prize money already doesn't matter that much. And if you look at the tournaments that were scored 3-1-0, they just played normally, and they said, well, if I get third place instead of second place because of a draw versus a win scoring thing, it doesn't matter, right? They're still just maximizing their ratings, so they keep getting invitations. And the difference in the prizes, I think, is not that big compared to the appearance fees. So they're just keeping their lifestyle going. So, yeah, it's an important point.
Yeah. Also, I just want to express, it's not like they're not trying to win the game. They are trying very hard. Just on the other side, they have to beat another very strong and solid grandmaster, right? It's not. So I'm just saying, it's not like professionals, they get to a crossroads and it's like, okay, I can just win the game or I can draw the game. It's like,
well, no. Obviously, it's difficult to win, but I think there's a range of efforts that we see, Kostya.
Yeah.
Like, Wesley So and everybody in between, there's a whole range of how hard they're 4 queen d4, queen e4, queen d4. I think you have to say there they didn't particularly try.
Yeah. So, I mean, no, then it certainly comes down to like the scoring system and stuff. But I feel like when I guess what I was trying to say is like when it just happens in like one tournament here, one tournament there, players aren't going to adjust the way they normally play chess that much, right? It's like very difficult to just be like, okay, now I'm just playing for a win,
Yeah. Like, especially if you're saying if you've got different scoring systems at different tournaments and you go to a different tournament and a different tournament, it's a lot to adjust to.
Yeah. I think, you get to like 2780 with a certain kind of like style and level. You're not just going to change up everything you do about your chess and just start taking crazy risks just because, you might get an extra, a few grand in some tournament. Yeah,
it's a lot of adjustment. There is one other scoring system out there that occurred to me as we were talking about the 3-1-0 system just now, which is Norway chess. Don't they use some version of like 3-2-1-0 where they play an Armageddon game? Right. If you draw your classical game, you then play an extra rapid game, which can give you an extra point in the standings compared to the draw. So you get the 2-point draw instead of the 1-point draw.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they got the Armageddon system. So you get more points for winning the Armageddon than for losing the Armageddon in case of a draw, but then you get more points for winning the classical game than for winning the Armageddon game. I forget exactly what it is, but yeah, no, that one's fun. But yeah, I feel like to me, it didn't seem like it changes the game all that much. It just seems like players play normal chess, and then if they have to play an Armageddon, they go play the Armageddon.
Right.
And then whatever happens, happens.
And players who are particularly good at rapid chess just get a boost in the standings, right? Like Magnus gets a lot of wins in the Armageddon, gets a lot of 2-point draws, and he's mildly happy about it. But everyone else is like, well, what are we going to do about it? We just play our best.
One thing also I want to say about the soccer scoring system is, okay, so for those of you who don't follow European soccer, one of the very cool things that they have is the bottom 4 teams will fall out. So you have to not be in the bottom 4. I wish American sports did that. We have these dumb teams that just stick around forever at the bottom of our tables. No one knows why they're there. But what that encouraged the people, let's just talk about the Premier League, but it happens in the Bundesliga as well, is that you're kind of in the middle of the table, and you're flirting with disaster, you're playing some other mid-table team. No, it's better not to take any risks. Just get the draw, get on the board, and you're going to be fine. So imagine you're 80 minutes into the game. We'll just be kind of a mutual agreement. We'll just pass the ball back and forth, and both teams get a point. And then, of course, for the fans, it's ugly. It's just disastrous. One thing, though, where I think chess is much better than soccer or any kind of other sport is a chess position always has a story to it, right? There is a question about somebody being active, having a plan, somebody defending against that plan. Oftentimes you have 2 competing conceptions of what's happening over the board. So there's always like an element of structure to it that's completely different to any kind of ball sport where they just start the point anew, right? You score a point and you start it over, and then, well, here we are. It looks the same, whereas every chess game has this beautiful structure built into it where somebody is doing something and we can talk about what the story then of the position is. And it's asymmetrical, right? That's the key thing to me, is that all these stories are generally asymmetrical. So there's very few positions in chess where it's like the soccer game where everything's just equal. Right. 11 players in the same pitch. If you were to try to convert it to a soccer pitch, a chess position would have uphills and downhills and all kinds of crazy battle-scarred monuments all over the board, So I think that's one of the key reasons also that this soccer scoring thing didn't take off in chess.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of problems with any kind of change in the scoring system, right? Like one problem is, do the FIDE ratings adjust to match it or not? Because the FIDE ratings are going to be such an important thing they're playing for. And then we've got the question of the prize money as sort of a major motivating factor as well, right? Like if tournaments were structured with more prizes and less appearance fees or something like that, then the tournament scoring system might matter more. But at present, it's not even clear how much the tournament scoring system matters in all cases outside of the World Championship cycle.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to make a quick thought on the World Championship cycle. So let's just say one thing that FIDE did for the last several cycles is they were like, all right, we're going to play 12 games. And if nothing happens, then we're going to go to a rapid tiebreak. It's very unsatisfying. And one of the things about tradition where it really hurt is back in the day, you would fight until a certain number of wins were had, and there's been different, all kinds of different agreements between the two sides that have gone before, but there was generally like you had to either reach a certain number of points or a certain number of wins. And what that created was this incredible duel to the death. Right? It was a duel to the death. People were going to get incredibly exhausted. People pushed to near death. When you see pictures of Karpov in his match with Kasparov, you can tell, oh, this dude's about to die. Amazing. That's the way it should be. I mean, that's what a world championship should look like. And they really blew it with this. And I think a lot of it has to do with scheduling. I get it. You got a certain schedule that you want to hold, and those KK matches went forever. For example, as an organizer, I can understand being pissed, but that's part of the beauty of what it was. And then what they did was then they changed the motivations by turning it into a rapid event. And so the match with Karyakin and Fabiano, which seemed like a disappointment to some, was marred by Carlsen's ability to just draw the whole thing out and say, you know what, I'm going to win in the rapid. And that's what he did.
Yeah, I totally disagree with that. I don't know. I mean, this is a separate topic, but I don't think players should be pushed to the brink of death in the World Championship match. I already stopped like watching football because of like the whole like concussion thing was like so upsetting that like they just don't care about the player. Seemingly don't care about the player's like long-term health. In football and other sports, obviously like fighting sports as well. But like, I don't really get why chess would join the ranks of like punishing our players' health.
So do you think Jesse should be canceled for what he just said?
Definitely. Yeah, I would clip the last minute, put it on Twitter.
Put it on Twitter and tell everybody to unsubscribe.
Yeah.
Because this guy is like basically actively enjoying the fact that Karpov was having a bad time.
I thought it was glorious, honestly. Like when these players go to the bitter end, I mean, that's what sport is. You know, in a world championship match, it's going to, you know, they all said it took a year or two off your life to do that match. And yeah, it's brutal, pressure, nerves, the whole thing.
Give your life to live it like a ball of flames.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm okay with the rapid tie breaks. I think I don't know.
Ooh.
I don't know if you draw 12 classical games against Magnus. You know what? You deserve you've earned the rapid tie break. I don't see why you should have to just keep going.
I far prefer my solution that they're both not champions and it's just the throne's vacant. Neither of you could do anything. Go home. There's no champions here. Just a bunch of drawers.
Also, I feel like with people are always so like dramatic with it. You know, my suggestion would be like just shorten the time control a little bit. like right now, make it like 90 plus 30 even. I don't think they've even tried that in a world championship. Just make it 90 plus 30 at least to start. You know, like, and then we can see what the draw rates are like. But we don't have to go like, in my opinion, to all these like extremes. Like stalemate as a win, like 3-1-0, you know, just shorten the time control slightly, you know, switch the bishop and the knight, just minor, very small changes that.
Just minor stuff, switch the bishop and the knight.
Minor
do you want to
stuff.
switch where you place them or do you want to, minor piece stuff. Do you want to switch where you place them or switch how the pieces move? So I have to move my bishop like a knight the whole game.
Just switch the starting position, you know, bishop's on B1 and G1, you know, it's like.
You know, one thing I'll just point out is the rule changes having to do with draws that are already kind of floating out there, that have been out there for a long time, which is, I feel like, the Sophia rules and the adjustment of time controls that Kostya is asking for, right? What's interesting about both of those is that none of it became standardized. And for players and fans, I think it's a problem. For example, about let's say 10 years ago, it seemed like FIDE was going to be really adamant that 90 plus 30 was going to be the time control of the future. And that didn't stick. And it's definitely a problem where then you have different events and you show up and it's totally different time controls. And so as a player and a fan, it's like, well, what are we doing here? Mm-hmm. Like, for example, in St. Louis this summer, we played game 2 hours plus 30, huge difference to 90 plus 30, you know? And then also the draw rules, I would be fine if let's say the Sophia rules were just like a thing. I would be fine with that. But again, that's also really not taken hold in any of the tournaments, at least in the US that I'm playing. So it's almost like there's this debate happening. The organizers have their own feelings and nobody has the authority to step in and say, okay, my friends, this is what we are doing.
Yeah. But of course, there's also a big difference between like top tournaments, which are meant to be marketed and broadcasted versus like open events, which have other motivations,
Just
but still, don't you feel there should be a standardization throughout the whole thing?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I wish I think 100% there should just be like one classical time control, one rapid, one blitz, maybe two, but like basically, yeah, FIDE should just be like 3 + 2 is blitz, 15-10 is rapid or whatever, 90-30 is classical.
It's almost, it's
So
kind of
much
like, you compare it to other sports, for example. Yes, like for example, when my daughter plays in the soccer leagues, they're playing, I think, 7 versus 7. That's partly because they don't have enough kids to play, but it makes sense to make kid rules or maybe a smaller field or a smaller goal. That makes sense to me. But if you go down the leagues, right, in soccer or any other sport, the fundamental rules are going to be the same. They might have less refs, right? There might just be one ref, for example, but it's still going to be the same fundamental rules. Whereas with chess, you're getting this huge huge kaleidoscope of different rules going on. And it's really weird. Partly, and I just bring it up because it's related to this question of the draw. Different organizers have different motivations and belief systems about how the draw thing should be addressed.
I mean, I understand the value in standardization, but there is a competing value as well, right? Which is trying to solve problems through innovation, right? Like, if there is some kind of problem, and I don't know if it's just perception or not, right? But if there is some kind of problem with draws or the excitement or the marketability of professional chess events, then you need to actually do some real experiments to get some data, and then eventually, maybe standardize around it. But you have to try stuff, right? I mean, there has to be a phase where you actually try something different.
Right.
I think maybe everything that's been tried hasn't super worked. Otherwise, maybe it would have been standardized.
Right. Let's see. Have there been any innovations that I feel like the 30-second increment, that definitely took off. Like that
increment has stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. When I played chess, I started off usually with delay, 5-second delay, and then that slowly switched over to increment. So yeah, in general, I think if people do like something, it will stick, but it takes time.
Yeah, Jesse and I started off with clocks where you couldn't tell how much time you had and whether or not you were going to flag. Right?
Oh, same. Actually, yeah. Those two. I had those two.
Yeah. So, I mean, digital clocks, everybody has agreed. Yeah, it's nice to know how much time I have. And not only that, let's have a few seconds minimum per move increment so we can write our move down and not flag. That's been taken up.
Actually, David, I feel like you should end this podcast with a rant because you, of all of us, you were the anti-draw crusader. You are famous out there for forcing this thing, big push. So how do you feel, whether it's about these systems or how in general, about how we've moved culturally with the draw, and what do you think needs to happen?
Okay. Let me just clarify a little bit. I don't think I'm 100% against all draws. I think like you, Jesse, I appreciate the beauty of like a nice stalemate idea, a good defense, and a long end game. I appreciate that kind of stuff. And I understand the arguments on even this scoring system we talked about today were partly around, well, how do we feel about draws? Do we feel that somebody else should, that someone should get more points for a game that's not quite winning, but they have an advantage? What I've always been against is sort of like contentless chess, right? Like a lack of an attempt to win. Prearranged draws, at some point I considered that to be cheating. And for a lot of people, it was like socially acceptable. So it's not really cheating, even if it might be against the rules, right? Like I might jaywalk and that might technically be breaking the law. I'm not sure what the laws are here right now, if that's changed or not. But it would be something where I'm like, well, culturally, socially, I don't think of it as I'm committing a crime, right? And other people were doing something that they didn't consider a crime, but I did consider it a crime. I thought it was a collusion that was disfavoring other people in the tournaments, et cetera, right? So that's, part of how I was super against it. One thing I like with the Venceslav Rutar system is that it is valuing draws. It's not saying draws are bad, right? It's saying like, it's trying to make it even more interesting at the end. Like, do you have enough of an advantage to get up a pawn or not, right? Or what kind of advantage can you force or not force? It's not saying draws are bad. It's saying let's score them a little bit more granularly, right? Mm-hmm. So I think I'm actually a little bit in that direction as well, where I think draws are fine. They just need to be interesting. Okay. And I don't think we need to kill draws at all. I think we just need to increase the chess content of games, like get around memorized opening theory, avoid prearrangements or strategical, like I need a rest day, but other people still have to play, just make things a little bit more fair and, pay professional players enough that they're willing to show up and work for 4 or 5 hours on the game that they have to play instead of, 10 or 15 minutes now and then, right? It should be worth it to fight all the way. I don't know if that was ranty enough for you, Jesse.
No, that was good. That was a good final rant, dude. Yeah.
All right. So our takeaway here is that none of the three of us particularly think that changing the scoring system is the answer to making chess either more compelling or more fair.
Well, I did just come up with one thing. I'm sorry to bring up like a new thing, but just a very quick question. But like, how would the Rutar scoring system change, like the queen d4, queen e4 Berlin draw? Wouldn't that still just be an equal draw and we'd still have to deal with that?
It would still be an equal draw. And it doesn't purport to change that. You can still make draws by repetition at any point, right? The only way it would change that is that while you're making that 2-point draw, other people might be making either favored draws or wins that are worth 5 points. Yeah. So if you were in a match, it would change nothing. But in a match, making that draw, we don't see that kind of draw very often in one-on-one matches, right? Because you're not getting ahead of anybody by getting a rest day. Yeah. Your opponent also gets a rest day. In normal chess, if I play a 100-move game with Kostya and we eventually have a difficult draw where he's up a pawn and whatever, I Philidor position successfully, and somebody else plays queen d4, they're actually getting ahead of us. We get the same half a point, but Kostya and I work for 5 hours and we're like exhausted and the other people are like just chilling at the bar. So now if you're making that kind of Berlin draw, the odds are and the danger is that in a tournament, there's people getting ahead of you. That's the way.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Okay. And now I guess people will soon see the match or the system tried out on our channel with the match coming up.
Stay tuned. Stay tuned.
Yeah. So folks, if you're interested in what we've just talked about, watch it in action. And I think that one thing that we can mostly agree on is that the proof is in the pudding. The proof isn't actually like trying something out and seeing if it works, right? Like you can say whatever you want about the 3-1-0 scoring system. And then Jesse can say, well, they tried it at a few tournaments for a few years and nobody was down with it. It didn't change how people played and it didn't become popular and it wasn't adopted and standardized, right? So let's have a look at what happens when two very strong players use this system. Obviously, a match is a different case than a tournament, so it'd also be interesting to see it in a tournament. But we are now, for those of you watching live, we're going to watch a live match. For those of you who are watching this as a recording, you can go dig up another recording. There's already been one match played between Sam Shankland and Surya Ganguly. And that match you can find, I think, on the Chess Base India channel, probably. And the match between Shankland and Grandelius, you'll be able to find on the ChessDojo Live YouTube channel. So let's see what it is. Take care, everybody.